I'll just quickly start off with a brief self-introduction. My name is Simon Archer. I'm loosely affiliated, maybe problematically affiliated, with Osgoode Hall Law School in Toronto, and I'm also a labor lawyer, so a law firm, Koski-Minsky, which is the funny words that are on the program. Problematically because each, I think, believes that I spend too much with the other, and so to get away from them both, I'm here with you for a couple of weeks to learn and study. This morning, and for part of this afternoon, I'll gloss by saying that we were learning a lot about what someone, and I don't know who it is, called the microphysics of power, while we examined how lawyers operated in the arbitral context, one that I'm closely familiar with and embrace as a labor lawyer. I use it all the time in the domestic way. And at times we became aware of and even frustrated with social exclusion within that system and the political legitimacy or illegitimacy of that system. Now, in the last session of the day, with our last breath today, we can engage, I think, in a discussion of what I will glibly perhaps gloss as the macro physics of power and its implications, and some of those implications will be the social exclusion and the political legitimacy questions that we were raising in the first 2 or 3 sessions. I divined that the practice at the TLSI is to avoid introductions that are long and that sound like essentially obituaries or eulogies. And so in this lively spirit, I won't enumerate Professor Brunkhorst's 26-page CV that lists his many qualifications, publications, and achievements, and instead I'll offer you, by way of introduction, a couple of labels and 2 or 3 facts by which to situate Hauke, our speaker. Professor Brunkhorst is a philosopher, a sociologist, and a political theorist from, if not quite maybe for, as we were discussing in the break, the Frankfurt School. His work includes at least 2 important treatments of Marx's 18th Premiere and of Hannah Arendt. We had a chance to talk about that about 5 years ago at a conference. He's lectured, worked, and taught all over the world at institutions as far apart as Chile and Wales, with one key episode in Dubrovnik starting in 1989 and during the 1990s, where you were leading a course in social philosophy when, if you know anything about the history of that region in the 1990s, civil war then broke out. And so although the causalities are still sort of undefined, it's very clear that Professor Brunkhorst's ideas matter. Today, we're here on the eve of another political crisis or disruption in the UK with the big vote tomorrow. And so it's perhaps not a coincidence that once again Professor Brunkhorst shows up to deliver a keynote on the theme of democracy under siege. So please join me in welcoming Professor Brunkhorst.
Thank you very much, Simon. I hope it will not end with a civil war. So, my first part is on rise and fall of the national democracy and briefly global constitutionalism. The second on post-national alternatives. The third, the shortest one, on the future of the European Union, if there is any. In the aftermath of the global economic crisis of 1929 and World War II, the national state became a democratic social welfare state. It was, for a period that lasted half a century, from about 1935 to about 1985 or 1940 to 1990, the first successful realization of a politically and socially inclusive democratic regime with a mixed economy that was a hybrid between capitalism and socialism. The relations of production were regulated by constitutionally enabled democratic class struggle. Article 14 of the German Basic Law codified private property, but Article 15 explicitly allowed the socialization of the means of production and codified in Marxist terms, Vergesellschaftung der Produktionsmittel. And Article 20 make the social republic a basic goal of the state and the liberal or socialist way of its realization due to democratic will formation alone. Instead of the dialectical tension between liberalism, Article 14, and socialism, Article 15, the EU treaties have constitutionalized competition law, Article 2, EC. The reinterpretation of the US Constitution since the mid of the 1930s, it was not so different from the German Constitution, had the same revolutionary result. Bruce Ackerman, the last book, not the last book, the second volume of We the People. The meaning of the due process clause and the commerce clause of the Constitution were reversed completely. They turned from legal means to stabilized capitalist freedom, Lochner era, into an instrument to save the people's freedom from capitalism. The one and only form of private property, and that is very important, that was established by the French Code Civil in 1804, became a borderline case. It was broken up into hundreds, if not thousands, of forms of property between public and private property. Social differences went down. The rich could no longer pay their palaces in Newport and Long Island, which were used as schools and universities. The Forest constellation still consisted in huge class differences. But with a growing pie, one could give to the poor without taking too much from the rich. The differences were effectively compensated by mass consumption and a quickly expanding educational system that allowed much more social mobility than ever before. The worker drove a small car, his boss a big car, both sticking in the same jam traffic, driving to the same holiday coast, sending their kids to the same public school. Nowadays, even leftist academics in Germany send their kids to the school, no longer their kids to the school with the Turks. No one sends them there, and for good reasons, because they have not so trained fists. Today, but the point is that this is allowed, that this is enabled legally, to make this choice. Choice can also be more restrictive in other respects. Today, social class mobility again is zero since decades. As in 1900, family income alone determines class affiliation. So, the successful establishment of the social welfare state that in countries like Sweden came close to democratic socialism impressively has demonstrated that there are not only bureaucratic but also democratic alternatives to the capitalist mode of production. Bourgeois class rule was constrained by trade union power, technocratic elites, stakeholders versus shareholders. This has turned the other way around now again. Electoral campaigns and majority decisions played a great role. 100 years of heavy class struggle and struggle over democratic rights in Western societies between 1850 and 1950 finally were successful in civilizing modern capitalism. We had capitalism with a human face for half a century, about, as I said already, 1935 and 1985, at least within the Western Hemisphere. In terms of justice, this was, to say it with a young Marx, a great progress. Marx used that for the emancipation of the Jews in France, a great progress. In the course, this was not the final destination, but it was a great progress. In the course of the 1960s, it became evident that the solution of the systemic problems of a functionally differentiated capitalist economy by the democratic social welfare state suffered from two structural problems. One was economically, the other culturally and socially. First, democratic welfarism came into an economically critical situation with the end of high growth rates that threatened modern capitalism with secular stagnation. a challenge modern capitalism never had to face before. Between 2000 and 2016, real investment in Germany, one of the biggest winners of globalization and Europeanization, decreased by 20%. Secular stagnation is not at all due to the presumably creative destruction of World War II, but, as Robert Gordon has shown, to the finalization of the great technological inventions of electricity, running water, the internal combustion engine, the chemical rearrangements of molecules, pharmacy, and mass communication already in the year 1940. Moreover, the critical situation of the world economy was reinforced by the aggressive return of market radicalism since the late 1970s that led to a secular increase of inequality. It is now back to the historical peak of 1900, Piketty. The great electronic inventions of the present, the internet, the mobile phone, and the personal computer are all at best low growth inventions with dramatically negative effects on the future of academic employment, Collins. The second problem was culturally and a problem of justice. The second problem was culturally and a trigger of social and political inequality beyond the sphere of production. National welfarism was white, male, and heterosexual. Egalitarian democratic solidarity ended everywhere at the color line and the gender line, with all social consequences of unpaid work and unequal wages. In public consciousness of democratic welfarism, all that did not matter. It was repressed and silenced. The discourse that articulated the latent authoritarianism of affluent Western societies was marginalized. Moreover, the exclusion of the color line and the gender line from public debate was stabilized by a public law of systemic discrimination. Habermas in the 1960s rightly made the diagnosis of a public sphere that was depoliticized and desiccated. However, for a regime that claims universal exclusion of inequalities, a constitutional regime with universal rights, this can become a serious problem of legitimization and motivation once it is politicized. I think this is very important, this universalistic core of our constitutions. Even democracy is, since its first mentioning of popular sovereignty, that was not really democracy in the French Revolution and in the American, taken as without alternative, as something only Article 16 of the French Declaration of Human Rights reads a country that has not the separation of powers, that means popular sovereignty, has not that, is a country that has no constitution. So all constitutions are, so to say, as a claim derogated by these constitutions. This is the universal claim of democracy. So, for a regime that claims universal exclusion of inequalities, this can become a serious problem of legitimization and motivation once it is politicized. In terms of justice, this was the dark side of democratic welfarism, its deeply unjust side. The repoliticization of the public sphere came in the 1960s, unexpected and unpredicted. Due to the consumerism and prolonged adolescence, the hegemony of the achievement principle was challenged for the first time in the history of modern capitalism and triggered a crisis of motivation in the name of a new utopianism and hedonism, beginning with the hippies, Woodstock, and so on. The latent authoritarian, this is a very important thing, yeah, the achievement principle is, so to say, the basic principle of modern capitalism, even in its prehistory, if you think on Max Weber's theory of the project ethics. The latent authoritarian structure of Western democracies triggered a crisis of legitimization. Latent authoritarianism was revealed with the first sentence of a speech of Mario Savio on a police car that was blocked by a sit-in on Berkeley campus, October 1, 1964. The two police officers in the car had allowed Savio to switch off his shoes and give a speech from the top of their car. His first sentence was, referring to the officers, they are family men, you know, they have a job to do, like Adolf Eichmann. He had a job to do. He fit into the machinery, end of quote. Many sentences, newspaper articles, scientific essays, and books, pro and con, followed, together with an entire industry of new and old, rediscovered and newly invented literature and empirical studies on authoritarianism and anti-authoritarianism in affluent societies. In the history, a new public discourse was created. Another, even shorter sentence revealed that the color line was not a problem of African Americans, but of all Americans and the entire human race. When the boxing champion Muhammad Ali in April 1966 justified his rejection of the official call to Vietnam with the words, they, the Viet Cong, never called me nigger. Suddenly, the oppression and suppression of the other, heading Derrida, came to the fore and became a problem of justice for the entire society. Wearing weapons openly by the Black Panthers was at the same time, was a communicative speech act that referred to the First Amendment and with one single act disclosed a word of the pouvoir constituant, of the constituent power that was no longer whitewashed. Yeah, the Article 1 is directly, the freedom of speech is constitutive for the constituent power of the people. And that was also the original meaning of being allowed to wear weapons. Yeah, it was explicitly Republican element. So now it is the business of the Republican Party and religious fundamentalists. Anyway, there were many other word-disclosing sentences, poems, actions, paintings, and happenings like that. In all fields, in one field of silence discourses after the other that triggered new expressive, emotional, strategic, and rational debates, conflicts and controversies on modern life and a just and decent society until today. Yeah. Ever new movements of that kind. The lines of color, gender, and heterosexuality that divided the West internally came under pressure all over the world, and the new social movements resulted in one of the greatest cultural revolutions ever. One only has to think of women's emancipation from thousands and hundreds of thousands of years of paternalism, and on the last referendum in Ireland on homosexual marriage, a country of a very conservative and hegemonial Catholic Church. Yeah. However, the national welfare state could not, and this had a big impact on the German CDU, yeah, in the direction of homosexual marriage. If the Irish do it, we can no longer stand behind. Yeah. So, however, the national welfare state could not solve the problem of growth alone, and the cultural revolution was transnational from the beginning. Both did not really fit to the national state. National welfarism was not fit for globalization in no respect. Neoliberalism was. It destroyed welfarism and globalized the neoliberal state together with an ever denser network of transnational civil and private law regimes which finally marginalized international public law. Global cosmopolitanism decayed together with the national state. Legal formalism was replaced by legal dynamism, and legally bound formal rule by legally unbound informal rule, as Koskinen has shown in his great book about rise and fall of international law. This morning, Eric, George has mentioned that this new legal regime, the arbitration courts and the arbitration courts system, regime, plays an important role here. He spoke of the incredible the incredible opacity of the arbitration regime. And this fits nicely to Carl Schmitt's Großraum theory from the 30s and his favorite vocabulary, flexibility and opacity. Yeah? Neoliberal globalization and reform have turned the relations of dependency between public power and private money upside down. Since the 1980s, the tax state that has taken the money away from the rich was replaced by the debt state that is dependent on the generosity of the rich. Since the 1990s, the workers lost their right to strike. Factually, there were no strikes any longer, and in exchange got credits unlimited at the expense of a new form of debt slavery. Finally, state-embedded markets turned into market-embedded states. So this is a formula of the people from the Max Planck Institute in Colonia, Streeck and Sharp and others. Yeah, so we must only say that. Yeah, state-embedded markets turned into market-embedded states to see the catastrophe. Within the neoliberal political economic regime, high profit rates can be maintained only at the expense of growing social differentiation. However, this had deadly consequences for growth and democracy. Growth comes under permanent threat of underconsumption, called Sweezy, and increasing in the 60s already, and increasing social inequality causes increasing political inequality, the studies of Armin Schaefer's. Democracy runs out of alternatives. Not absolute poverty, but relative inequality discourages the people, resulting in a new, but this time not utopian and hedonistic, but paralyzing and depressing crisis of motivation that explains the dramatic decrease of the turnout for lower, middle, and underclasses down to 30% and less, whereas the upper classes turnouts went up close to 100%. The result, leftist parties lose their voters, moving further right from election to election. Finally, we are left with a gloomy alternative between right parties of market fundamentalism plus PC culture and far-right parties of market fundamentalism plus neoconservative cultural background that is nationalist, racist, and religious fundamentalist. What was fiction in 1979, that there is no alternative, from that time onwards became real due to its consequences, a paradigmatic case of the Thomas theorem of sociology. The disastrous increase of the Thomas theorem is that if people define a situation as real, it is in its consequences real. Yeah. The disastrous increase of social inequalities also demolished the historical and actual justice of the global culture and civil rights revolution, and the global cultural and civil rights revolution. For the unemployed, previously convicted and lesbian African American who lives in the homophobe and misogynist slum area of Baltimore with its racist police officers, the progressive new rights and freedoms have no fair value any longer. And the same is true for the quickly growing banlieue of Europe. Neoliberalism not only destroyed or at least demolished welfarism, it also globalized the neoliberal state together with an ever denser network of transnational civil law regimes which, as a law of coordination of the interests of the ruling classes, finally marginalized international public law and stabilizes the unequal relations between the global haves and global have-nots, was said in the panel before here. The state was subverted by private-public partnerships and, together with a turn from the debating and disputing temple of the General Assembly to the executive police of the Security Council Koskiniemi, ever more power was transferred from the legislators to transnationally united executive bodies, the paradigm cases, the European Council, and in particular the Euro Group, that is not even mentioned in any law book. Yeah? So, in a completely informal institution. Legal formalism was replaced by legal dynamism and legally, I have said that already, sorry, by legally einbound informal rules. The invention of the Eurogroup at the end of this period is paradigmatic. At the height of the Greek crisis, the group decided to expel the Greek Minister of Finance from an ongoing session. The minister asked for legal legitimation. The chief of the group called for his lawyer. They told him that the group did not exist legally, hence everything they did was legal. Again, this trend is stabilized by the constitutional treaties and the institutional structures of the European Union. Macroeconomic decisions are determined in advance by the treaties. Price stability trumps full employment. Labor is all in the treaties and is all constitutional law. Labor market access trumps democratic class struggle. Financial conditionality trumps solidarity. Austerity trumps Keynesian solutions. Market imperatives trump democratic decisions, and competitiveness trumps everything. In Europe, macroeconomic choices are taken in an institutional setting that provides near perfect protection against the interference of input-oriented political processes and democratic accountability in the constituencies affected. That was a quote from Fritz Scharp. The final touch of this institutional setting is, as Jelena von Achenbach has shown, the trilogue procedure that precedes the ordinary legislative procedure of the three European powers of Parliament, Commission, and Council, and allows the leaders of these institutions to bypass the parliamentary, public, and the constitutional law of the Parliament, depriving en passant parliamentary minorities from any influence. Now, briefly, the second part, and then a very short last part. If there is a future of global capitalism with the alternatives, the transnational alternatives, if there is a future of global capitalism with market-embedded states, and that means an alternative that is the option of the people who vote for remaining in this country. If there is a future of global capitalism with market-embedded states, the likelihood is extremely high that it will be a new formation of authoritarian liberalism. We are already approaching a hyper-modern dual state with a social separation of labor between authoritarian prerogatives and rule of law. Ernst Fraenkel and Franz Neumann's early works from the late 1930s are of gloomy actuality again. The new dual state consists in a strong tendency towards legal over-integration of the ruling classes and under-integration of the lower and excluded populations. Neves' analysis of Brazil. Whereas the former appear only as plaintiffs in court, the latter appear only as accused. Prerogative law and the declared or undeclared state of siege are normalized. Paradigmatic is the emergence of smart and flexible border regimes which are repealing all citizens living in the border region from most of their constitutional rights. In the United States, these are already 2/3 of the entire population. It is a 100-mile zone, and you must only look at the map, the coast region and the region of the Great Lakes, including Canada and so on. 2/3 of the American population. In the middle is nothing. There's no land of nowhere. AfD, Front National, Viktor Orban, and the American and the British Donald Trump are the logical consequence of market fundamentalism in permanent crisis. In case of doubt, send the Marines. Or as Heinz Klug this morning rightly stated, the state is back, but the state does not represent democracy at all. The only alternative to authoritarian liberalism is democratic socialism. This is my final thesis. However, democratic socialism can be successful only if it solves all 5 crises at once, which today shake world society, and this is nearly impossible. The crises of growth, social inequality, societal exclusion, environmental devastation, and functional globalization. All these critical tendencies are related to the basic clusters of differentiation in modern society. So what I have in mind is a theory of complex differentiation of modern society with a couple, and crises, as you can already learn from Marx's Capital, crisis is emerging from the differentiations, the functional differentiation of the economic system, that leads to to exploitation, to a priority of exchange value over use value, and so on. So from that you can see that the forms of differentiation, and modern society is not only functional differentiation but a couple of differentiations. The increasing social difference, the increasing social difference causes the already described crisis of motivation and legitimization, and enhances the threat of secular stagnation. Thus, to save growth and democracy, massive redistribution of wealth and to the lower and middle classes is the only realistic perspective, just because only these classes buy masses of consumer goods. Massive redistribution would kill both birds with one stone: the threat of economic collapse through stagnation and the threat of democratic collapse through political inequality. Unfortunately, there are much more birds in the air over Bodega Bay. The structural difference of center and periphery, the second one, is transformed into the social difference between included and excluded populations. National exclusion rates increased since 2000 between 24 and 40%. Whereas lower, middle, and underclasses have lost any chance to change their inferior social position, excluded populations are excluded from access to all social systems, as the Homo sacer and the outlaw and stratified societies. The only promising cure is massive investments in educational and socialization agencies, together with a basic income high enough, for example, to pay tuition and the entire costs of a study in the United States. This is the Ackermann-Offel suggestion. The difference of system and environment causes ecological devastation. The only solution for the environmental problems, if there's any, is green growth. Everybody accepts that now, except some parties like the GOP. The enormous proportions of the problem come to the fore Once we take into account only CO2 reduction through carbon capture and storage, because this is possible only with far-reaching infringements of land ownership worldwide. From that we see the social dimension of that problem. In principle, all that is feasible by parliamentary legislation on the national level, even if it needs, therefore, coordinated intergovernmental action, which is highly implausible. However, for the last problem, no intergovernmental solution is available any longer. Functional differentiation went global, and if we only take the most dangerous system of capitalist world economy in account, there seems to be no other effective mean against the blackmailing power of global capital than the transference of real power, still called with an outdated term sovereignty, to democratically legitimated and controlled transnational governmental structures on regional and global levels. What it needs is democratic transnational government and not post-democratic governance. Thus, now I come to the end, thus one major step on the road to global democratic socialism should be the abolishment of the present technocratic constitution of Europe by a full-fledged and its replacement by a full-fledged federal regime that is radically democratic. What is good about the European Union is that there is already the unique invention of a democratically elected transnational parliament. Articles 9 to 12 of the Treaty of Lisbon constitutionalized the by far most advanced democracy of an international organization. The treaty already contains nearly everything needed for an at least partial continental solution of the 5 crises. The ordinary legislative procedure that binds the 3 European powers, the Parliament, the Commission and the Council together, comes, as Jürgen Bast has shown, very close to a full-fledged constitutionalization of European democracy, because, as Franzius and Habermas have shown, it represents both the national peoples and the citizens of the Union. Unfortunately, at present, the Parliament, the legislative procedure directed by the Trilogue, and the Articles 9 to 12 are nothing else than constitutional kitsch. Koskiniemi, this term. Constitutional kitsch. Not the agencies of legislative procedure are the European legislator, but half informal and completely informal groups like the European Council and the Euro Group, as we have seen. Latest, since the so-called Greek crisis, the perfect protection of the united executive bodies of Europe is under public attack from the right and from the left. With every further day of crisis, it becomes ever more evident that the only way out is a derogation of the treaties, the abolishment of the European Council and the Eurogroup, and a new constitutional foundation of a union of the Eurozone, equipped with a legislative procedure that has comprehensive jurisdiction, Allzuständigkeit as the German lawyers say, or on the federal level and administrative power to enforce it. The European Parliament needs the same budgetary competencies as the American Congress, and that includes the right to impose taxes. The slogan of the American Revolution is true, also the other way around. There is no representation without taxation. Taxation is a necessary, not sufficient condition of any public law that is egalitarian and anti-hierarchical. Starker Staat is starke Steuer, Marx has written in Capital. Yeah, strong state is strong taxes. Not in Capital, in its 18th Premier. Taxation is a necessary, moreover, the Union needs full competence in foreign affairs and a European army. A model of federal foreign policies in Europe could be the German Empire of 1870, which still had autonomous foreign policies and armies on the state level. Most of the rest then can be taken away from Brussels and done by the national states, and it needs a possibly a possibility to increase and decrease the value of the common currency for member states and regions under certain conditions of emergency regulated by the European legislative procedure. Nothing less powerful than a European federal regime with full budgetary, taxation and foreign policy competencies will be able to cope with the blackmailing power of global economy, if any regime is able to cope with that, and by the way, with the military threats from regimes like Putin's Russia, and to solve the coming migration problems in accordance with human rights and democracy, and not by its abolishment as in the present crisis. That is, by the way, not a refugee crisis, but a European crisis of human rights. As empirical research shows, a majority of European citizens favors a federal union that gives the choice over political, economic and social alternatives back to the people. Moreover, there are surprisingly large majorities even in favor of a transfer union and a European social welfare state. More than 70% of the Germans would support such a union, even if they would lose money. However, because the institutional setting of the EU provides a nearly perfect protection against any movement of input democracy, the option for a European democracy with real choices literally has become utopian, Ortlos. And the commodified old mass media have desensitized themselves for everything that does not fit to the existing political system. Therefore, everybody thinks that I prefer a European social welfare state, but none of my neighbors. A silent spiral. However, legitimization crisis now begins to break the spiral of silence. The far-right winners of the European elections have at least, and the national elections, have at least the one democratic achievement to present the European power elites with the choice either to watch passively their own agony and to lose the majority in one parliament after the other to the right, and to adapt and convert to authoritarian liberalism. This, unfortunately, will be has a high likelihood. Or to take the bull by the horns and let the people decide themselves. The sooner, the better are the chances of democratic growth and enlargement, and even if they decide against Europe, it would at least be their own deliberative and democratic choice. Thank you.